Have you ever wondered who's this man on the dollar? Welcome to our channel with a new adventure about George Washington. Number 1. Childhood and family background 1732 to 1743. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He was born into a family of moderately prosperous planters. His father, Augustine Washington, was a tobacco planter who had built a successful career in the colony. His mother, Mary Ball Washington, was Augustine's second wife, and George was the eldest of their 6 children. The Washington family had connections to Virginia's colonial elite, and George's early years were shaped by the expectation that he would enter into public service. His father died when George was just 11 years old, which significantly impacted the family's financial situation. Although he was not able to travel to England for formal schooling like many of his contemporaries, George was largely self-educated, relying on tutors and the example of his older half-brother Lawrence Washington, who became a father figure to him. Number 2. Early career and the French and Indian War 1749 to 1758. Washington's early career began with his work as a surveyor, a skill that he developed during his teenage years. At the age of 17, he secured an appointment as the official surveyor for Culpeper County, Virginia. His work surveying the frontier gave him valuable experience in the wilderness and helped him develop the physical toughness and leadership skills that would later serve him well in the military. In 1752, when Washington was 20, his brother Lawrence died, leaving George the estate at Mount Vernon. The following year, Washington's life took a dramatic turn when he was commissioned as a lieutenant colonel in the Virginia militia. His first military experience came during the French and Indian War, a conflict between Britain and France for control of North America. In 1754, Washington led a small force to the Ohio Valley, where he clashed with French forces at Fort Duquesne's modern-day Pittsburgh. Although his first military campaign ended in defeat, Washington gained valuable combat experience and a reputation for bravery. In 1755, he served as an aide to British General Edward Braddock in a failed attempt to capture the same fort. Braddock was killed, but Washington's leadership during the retreat earned him widespread praise. By the end of the French and Indian War, Washington had resigned his commission in the Virginia militia, frustrated with British military policies. Nevertheless, his experiences in the conflict had taught him critical lessons about leadership, strategy, and the strengths and weaknesses of the British military. Number 3. Plantation life and marriage to Martha Custis 1759 to 1774. After the French and Indian War, Washington returned to Mount Vernon and became a successful planter. He managed his vast estate, which grew tobacco and other crops, and he expanded his landholdings through purchases and inheritance. During this period, Washington became increasingly concerned about British taxation and policies in the American colonies. In 1759, Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 children from her previous marriage. The marriage brought additional wealth to Washington and strengthened his social standing in Virginia's elite. Although George and Martha did not have any children together, Washington adopted her 2 children, John Jackie and Martha Patsy. During these years, Washington became a prominent figure in Virginia society, serving in the House of Burgesses, Virginia's colonial legislature, and becoming involved in local and colonial politics. His growing concerns about British rule would eventually lead him to become a central figure in the American Revolution. Number 4. American Revolution 1775 to 1783. By the early 1770s, tensions between the American colonies and Britain were escalating. Washington was a vocal critic of British policies, particularly the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, which imposed taxes on the colonies without representation in Parliament. As a delegate to the First Continental Congress in 1774, Washington joined other colonial leaders in calling for a united response to British actions. When the Revolutionary War began in April 1775, Washington was appointed by the Second Continental Congress as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. He faced the enormous challenge of leading an untrained and poorly equipped army against the world's most powerful military force, the British Army. Washington's leadership was tested from the very beginning. In the early stages of the war, he successfully drove the British out of Boston, but he suffered several defeats, including the loss of New York City in 1776. Despite these setbacks, Washington's determination and ability to inspire his troops kept the Continental Army together through difficult times. One of the turning points of the war came in the winter of 1776, when Washington led a daring surprise attack on the Hessian forces at Trenton, New Jersey, crossing the icy Delaware River on Christmas night. The victory boosted morale and helped reinvigorate the revolutionary cause. Throughout the war, Washington's strategy was often one of persistence and attrition. He avoided large-scale confrontations with the British, focusing instead on wearing down the enemy and gaining support from the French, who provided critical military and financial assistance. The war culminated in 1781 with the Siege of Yorktown, where Washington's forces, combined with French troops and a French naval blockade, forced the surrender of British General Cornwallis, effectively ending the war. Number 5. Post-war years and Constitutional Convention 1783 to 1789. After the war ended in 1783, Washington resigned his commission and returned to Mount Vernon, intending to retire from public life. He was hailed as a national hero, but his return to private life was short-lived. The newly independent United States was struggling under the weak government created by the Articles of Confederation, and Washington became increasingly concerned about the country's future. In 1787, Washington was persuaded to attend the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, where delegates from the states gathered to create a new framework for government. Washington was elected president of the convention, and his leadership helped ensure the successful drafting of the U.S. Constitution. After the Constitution was ratified, Washington was unanimously elected as the nation's first president in 1789. Although he was initially reluctant to take on the role, Washington believed it was his duty to serve the country in its formative years. Number 6. Presidency 1789 to 1797. Washington served 2 terms as president, from 1789 to 1797. During his presidency, he established many of the precedents and traditions that would shape the office of the president for future generations. He believed in a strong but balanced federal government, and he worked to unify the young nation, which was often divided by regional interests and political factions. One of Washington's most significant challenges as president was navigating the tensions between 2 emerging political factions. The Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, who favored a strong central government and close ties with Britain, and the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, who advocated for states' rights and sympathized with the French Revolution. Washington sought to remain neutral, but his administration ultimately adopted many Federalist policies, including the creation of a national bank and a system of tariffs to protect American industry. Washington's foreign policy was shaped by his desire to keep the United States out of European conflicts. In 1793, he issued the Proclamation of Neutrality, which declared that the U.S. would remain neutral in the ongoing war between Britain and France. This policy of neutrality would remain a cornerstone of American foreign policy for many years. In 1796, Washington decided not to seek a 3rd term, setting a precedent for future presidents. In his famous farewell address, he warned against the dangers of political parties and entangling alliances with foreign nations, advice that would echo through American history. Number 7. Retirement and death, 1797 to 1799. After leaving the presidency, Washington returned to Mount Vernon, where he focused on managing his estate and maintaining his role as a respected elder statesman. He continued to be involved in public affairs, advising his successors and occasionally corresponding with political leaders. On December 12, 1799, Washington became ill after riding through snow and rain to inspect his plantation. His condition rapidly worsened, and on December 14, 1799, he died at the age of 67, likely of acute epiglottitis or a severe throat infection. His death was widely mourned both in the United States and abroad, as he was regarded as the father of the nation. Washington was buried at Mount Vernon, where his tomb remains a national shrine. His legacy as a military leader, statesman, and the first president of the United States endures, and he is often remembered as one of the most important figures in American history. Thank you for watching us. Like and subscribe if you want more adventures.